Wilson's foreign policy was defined by idealism and a desire to reshape the world order, but it was fraught with contradictions. While he advocated for self-determination and democracy, he paradoxically intervened in Latin American countries, undermining their sovereignty. Additionally, his push for the League of Nations was at odds with his reluctance to compromise with Congress, ultimately leading to the U.S. not joining the organization. Wilson's idealistic vision often clashed with the complex realities of international politics, revealing inconsistencies in his approach. When WWI began in 1914, Wilson advocated for U.S. neutrality, campaigning for re-election in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." However, as the war progressed, German aggression, particularly the sinking of the Lusitania and the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare, pushed Wilson to reconsider neutrality. By 1917, he led the U.S. into the war, framing it as a moral obligation to make the world safe for democracy. Wilson's shift from neutrality to active involvement in World War I was driven by a combination of strategic and moral considerations. The escalation of German submarine attacks threatened American lives and commerce, making neutrality increasingly untenable. Furthermore, Wilson's vision of a post-war world order based on democratic principles compelled him to take action, positioning the U.S. as a leader in shaping global peace efforts. In 1917, following Germany's resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare, which sank U.S. ships, and the interception of the Zimmermann telegram, in which Germany proposed a military alliance with Mexico against the U.S., Wilson asked Congress to declare war, stating the goal to make the world safe for democracy. Wilson envisioned a post-war world where nations would resolve conflicts peacefully through diplomacy rather than warfare. American economic interests also played a significant role in the decision to enter World War I. The U.S. had strong financial ties to the Allied powers, with American banks and businesses heavily invested in their success. As the war dragged on, the risk of losing these investments became a powerful incentive for the U.S. to support the Allies, aligning economic interests with Wilson's moral and strategic objectives. He championed the establishment of the League of Nations, an international organization aimed at fostering cooperation and preventing future conflicts. His vision also included promoting self-determination for oppressed peoples and spreading democratic governance as a foundation for global stability. Wilson's visionary plan for a just and lasting peace, known as the 14 Points, had a profound impact on modern diplomacy by laying the groundwork for international cooperation and conflict resolution. The establishment of the League of Nations, despite its initial shortcomings, set a precedent for future organizations like the United Nations, emphasizing collective security and multilateral diplomacy. Additionally, his advocacy for self-determination and democratic governance influenced the decolonization movements and the promotion of human rights in the 20th century and beyond. Wilson's vision also emphasized the reduction of armaments and the removal of economic barriers to promote global prosperity. By advocating for open diplomacy and the resolution of disputes through arbitration, his ideas laid the foundation for modern international relations, shaping the principles of cooperation and peace that continue to guide global governance today. However, the League of Nations faced significant limitations that hindered its effectiveness. One major issue was the lack of participation by key global powers, most notably the United States, which weakened its authority and influence. Additionally, the League struggled with enforcing its resolutions and lacked a standing military force, limiting its ability to maintain peace and prevent aggression. Wilson was a central figure at the Paris Peace Conference, becoming the first sitting U.S. president to travel to Europe. The conference resulted in several key treaties, the most significant of which was the Treaty of Versailles. This treaty imposed harsh reparations and territorial losses on Germany, aiming to prevent future aggression but ultimately sowing seeds of resentment that contributed to World War II. Additionally, the conference led to the redrawing of national boundaries and the creation of new states in Europe and the Middle East, reshaping the geopolitical landscape of the post-war world. Wilson was forced to compromise on many of his 14 points to get the League of Nations included in the Treaty of Versailles. However, his efforts were met with resistance, particularly from isolationist factions in the U.S. Senate, who opposed American involvement in international organizations. Despite Wilson's tireless advocacy for the League, the U.S. ultimately did not join, weakening its effectiveness and leaving many of his visionary goals unfulfilled. Returning home, Wilson faced fierce opposition from a Republican-controlled Senate, led by Henry Cabot Lodge, who feared the League would drag the U.S. into foreign wars without congressional approval. Wilson's inability to secure Senate approval for the Treaty of Versailles ultimately led to the U.S. never joining the League of Nations. This failure weakened the League's effectiveness and highlighted the challenges of balancing international cooperation with domestic political concerns. Wilson embarked on a grueling nationwide tour to rally public support for the treaty, during which he suffered a devastating stroke in October 1919. He was largely incapacitated for the remainder of his presidency, and his wife, Edith, effectively managed his duties in secret. The Senate ultimately rejected the Treaty of Versailles, and the United States never joined the League of Nations. This is considered a great personal and political tragedy for Wilson. The rejection of the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations marked a significant blow to Wilson's vision for international cooperation. Despite his efforts, the United States remained isolated from the League, which weakened its effectiveness and contributed to the failures of international diplomacy in the interwar period. Wilson's legacy is a subject of intense historical debate because of his profound contradictions. The absence of the United States from the League of Nations significantly undermined the organization's authority and ability to enforce its resolutions. Without the economic and military power of the U.S., the League struggled to prevent conflicts and enforce peace treaties, ultimately failing to stop the aggression that led to World War II. This highlighted the necessity of American involvement in global affairs, eventually leading to the formation of the United Nations, where the U.S. took a more prominent role. He successfully implemented a sweeping progressive agenda that reshaped the American economy and government's role. His idealistic vision of self-determination and international cooperation, though flawed, laid the groundwork for the United Nations and modern international law. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1919 for his efforts to create the League of Nations. A Southerner by upbringing, Wilson allowed his cabinet members to segregate their federal departments, rolling back decades of racial integration that had occurred since Reconstruction. He fired many black federal workers and imposed strict segregation in workplaces, restrooms, and cafeterias. Wilson's sympathy for the Ku Klux Klan was evident when he screened D.W. Griffith's pro-Ku Klux Klan film, The Birth of a Nation, at the White House, the first film ever shown there, and reportedly praised it. During the war, his administration passed the Espionage and Sedition Acts, which were used to brutally suppress dissent, imprison anti-war protesters, and target socialists and labor activists. Woodrow Wilson was a president of grand visions and deep flaws. He sought to reform capitalism at home and end war abroad, yet he presided over the systematic oppression of black Americans and the suppression of free speech. He is a figure who truly embodies the complexities of American history, a man whose ideals helped shape the 20th century, but whose actions often fell tragically short of his own professed principles.